Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Adnan Kazi. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Analytics Private Limited. Welcome to today's show. It is such a pleasure to have such a distinguished panel today with us. But before we start, I'll just talk about a little bit about CxO Forum. So CxO Forum is a knowledge sharing platform. The idea is to bring the corporate leaders and industry leaders together in one forum and then make them collaborate for the better use of knowledge sharing and to help Pakistan and other countries collaborate more and grow. So if you talk about analytics basically is an IT and AI data analytics consulting firm working in North America, Pakistan, and Middle East. And when you talk about artificial intelligence, it's a buzzword that many people are using very frequently, but in very layman terms or in very simple terms or simple words, it's basically all about enabling the computer systems and machines to exhibit traits which are very much human-like. So for instance, learning, capability to learn from history and past, and then problem solving, seeing things, comprehending things, understanding all these capabilities. If you start trying to get machines to do that, basically we can say that the machines are getting artificially intelligent. Now we all, on day-to-day basis, interact with AI systems. For instance, if you are going through an eye scan, now eye scans have inbuilt capability to scan your retina and run some computer vision algorithms and tell you if you are pre-diabetic or diabetic or absolutely normal. When you're driving self-driving cars like Tesla in the US and North America, basically they are being driven and by computer vision algorithms and AI algorithms. So again, it's AI. So, once we go to the West and we, especially in Europe and North America, we get to see a lot of AI being used on day-to-day basis. But when we look at Pakistan as a country, we believe that the corporate sector of Pakistan, you talk about big companies in financial sector, telecommunication sector, and other sectors as well, like manufacturing and fast-moving consumer goods and all. We believe that the adoption of AI has not been at par with what we have seen globally in the West, especially. So this brings us to a thought that what are the barriers and what is actually stopping Pakistan and Pakistani companies and corporates to actually start adopting AI and start embarking upon AI journeys and doing something really innovative. I'm not saying that we are not doing that, but all I'm saying is that there are some barriers that apparently are restricting the adoption in one way or the other. So to understand this question and to understand what are those barriers, I'm pleased to introduce today's panelists who are really the thought leaders when it comes to data analytics, when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I'll quickly make a quick introduction and then we can really jump onto the questions and get answers and learn from their years of experience in this field. So first of all, we've got Qazafi Qayyum. Qazafi is the CEO of Analytics Private Limited and 10x AI. Qazafi is formerly was working with Teradata as the country manager for Teradata Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Afghanistan. So he was looking after all the territories that I mentioned. And in last 20 years, Qazafi has been widely consulted by large-scale organizations in telecommunication, financial sector, and other sectors as well, while they were going through their data-driven transformations and digital transformation journeys. So he consulted for them. And he's also sitting on the academic boards of multiple universities, especially FAST, Lahore, and Beria University as well, whereby he's advising on the academia on AI-related and other subjects as well. We have got Asif Akram. Asif Akram is, and we are really pleased to have him on board today as a panelist. Asif is the Chief Operating Officer of Systems Limited, which is one of the largest growing organizations and has been recently appreciated by global perspectives as well. So Asif was formerly working for, I think more than 15 years with IBM, globally in different roles. IBM GBS is, you all know that IBM GBS is one of their largest pillars, services pillars within the organization. And Asif was heading GBS in Pakistan, then he moved to Middle East, and he's widely known as someone whereby the large organizations can get information and get trustworthy guidance from Asif for their sustainable growth. And he's a management consultant to many organizations. So it's really an honor to have him on board with us. We've got Sadaf Saad. Sadaf Saad is currently working as Chief Information Officer at PepsiCo Pakistan. And again, a pleasure to have her on board as well as a panelist. Sadaf was formerly working with the largest and the sole distributor of Procter & Gamble in Pakistan, and currently working with PepsiCo. Formerly worked with Affinity as well, which is again an AI-driven platform. So carries a lot of relevant experience in data analytics and has been involved personally in defining the data-driven transformations and AI-driven transformations for these big companies. So first of all, a very warm welcome to Qazafi, you, Asif, and Sadaf, and really looking forward and excited about learning from all of you in today's discussion. So my first question to Sadaf is that I believe that lack of understanding and the fear of unknown are two areas which I personally believe that are really causing this barrier and restricting the adoption of AI in Pakistan in the corporate sector and other industries as well. So what are your comments on this fear of unknown and lack of certainty when it comes to AI?
So, thank you so much, Adnan, for inviting me over. And I believe that the fear of unknown stops pretty much all innovation. AI being a relatively new domain in this part of the world. So, obviously, we're still struggling with quality of data. How do we get insights and derive insights from data? So, we are still, at the toddler stage. So, when you talk about AI, that's pretty advanced for a nation which is still trying to get its, data strategy in line. So essentially, the fear is not so much because we don't have enough data or people do actually believe that data can help them. But the main issue is that how does analytics or AI or machine learning become relevant to business? So it's not just a technology per se, but that relevance is completely missing. And perhaps I do blame the technology landscape to some extent on this because, as a partner, that awareness creation is somewhat, in my humble opinion, is lacking in this entire ecosystem. So people come in, they pitch solutions, they're not pitching, a framework or something which is sustainable. So on the one hand, there are corporations who have major IT investments on ERPs, tons and tons of data. They have, when you go into the financial sector, FMCG, big data, telcos, big data. What is being done with that data? Pretty much nothing. And what exactly is that data being leveraged in terms of foresights, in terms of trend analytics? Nothing much. So I think essentially we need to take it step by step and try to figure out the data situation before we actually go towards pushing people towards artificial intelligence and machine learning, because right now this market is ripe. I mean, there is a lot of opportunity. However, this needs to be customized and it needs to be tailored to the requirements of particular domains, verticals, and FMCGs. One size does not fit all.
Absolutely. So that I agree with you. So basically, you believe that there are more challenges, bigger challenges than just the fear of unknown or the lack of certainty when it comes to AI. And I think that you have a point. So taking the discussion forward, Asif, I mean, based on your experience with the Middle East and especially with the organizations like IBM, global organizations, and having worked with the customers in those regions, if you compare those customers, large-scale customers with Pakistani corporates industries, do you think that there's a lack of organizational maturity that is kind of a barrier in terms of the adoption of AI, or you have another perspective on this?
Adnan, firstly, thank you for having me over. I really appreciate that. It's an exciting topic. What I want to explain a little bit is that, AI is not about technology. And I think I agree with Sadaf a little bit. What she's saying is that we're making it a very tech-centric. And this is not a Pakistan statement. This is more of a international statement as well. It is getting our data right. It's getting our people strategy right. It's getting the processes right, and then putting in the right tech to do it. So when I look at these challenges, as you just said, around the world, and then relate them to Pakistan, they're not many different challenges. All organizations, especially in the Middle East and around the world, are struggling with the same thing. They're all trying to figure out how do you break the silos within the organization, because the information has to travel from one place to another place. How do you put the right processes in place so that you can get the right information and then build those artificially intelligent models on top of it? And how do you get the right people in the organization to do it? Right now, there is also a battle between who owns AI. Is it the CIO? Is it the chief digital officer? Is it the chief marketing officer? Or is it the CEO himself or herself? Again, that's a battle that is going on around the world as well. And there are different models being tried, as are being tried on data. There are chief data officers around in the organizations as well. So when I summarize this situation, and we can come back to Pakistan, this is a typical people process technology situation. And unless we get all the three pillars right and have the right data available, AI is going to stay as a challenge. With COVID, we've been lucky that there is a leapfrog on AI. If it was going to take 10, 15 years to make it really largely commercial, that journey now has been rapidly fast tracked. And now we need to get somewhere in 2 to 3 years. Organizations that did not have the basic tech are putting in the basic tech. The organizations that had data are now trying to do something with that, because we're being forced into this situation. So COVID is a big catalyst for artificial intelligence, but then unless AI becomes a board level topic owned by the CEO, that's my experience around in large organizations, it's extremely difficult for it to be effective. Over to you.
Absolutely. Asif, you're really spot on. And one thing that I got from your message is that, as you mentioned, that lack of data, because obviously AI is not dependent on the data that gets trained on, right? Lack of data is one of the biggest issues. And coming to you, I mean, we all know that machine learning models will starve if they don't have the data to get trained on. So what do you think that is this dearth of data, dearth of quality data, one reason which is causing this barrier, or is it not?
Thank you, Adnan. Well, obviously, I think we all understand that for any AI model to work, you need the underlying detailed data for it to be effective. And I do agree. I think data quality would play a big role in terms of the effectiveness of those models that you try to build as part of any organization. But I would put a word of caution here as well, because at times I feel that a lot of organizations really do not understand the actual quality of their data, right? And they have a perception about it, and that perception can prohibit them from undertaking a lot of initiatives which they can base on the data which they already have. So if I look at it from a 30,000 feet view, I think any typical organization would have two sets of data. One is transactional in nature, which is more process oriented. It is normally automated. It is very high quality, and it is very detailed. I think most organizations have that portion right. The other aspect is the demographic data, where normally typical organizations would have the challenges in terms of its completeness, in terms of the quality and accuracy of that data. But again, what organizations need to understand is that an enterprise data quality project is not the way of looking at it, because in the end, the cost of quality or the cost of fixing that data quality issue might not be providing the potential ROI in terms of using that data once it's fixed. So I think that there needs to be a balance which organizations need to create. It's easier said than done, but I think if you are looking at it from the right perspective in terms of driving it top down by understanding which business problem you're trying to solve as an organization, and then going out and looking at which data points are relevant, that is, maybe a more manageable way of looking at it. The other element which I would want to highlight to your point is that, organizations are normally looking at the internal data that they have. Whereas if you talk about AI, a lot of external data, to the organization is also very relevant and adds a lot of value. You talk about data sets which are commonly available, like weather data, like population or census data, financial indicators. All of these data points or data sets are relevant to a lot of organizations and can add value in terms of the problem that they're trying to solve. The third sort of data element, which I think every organization today has, is the unrelational or non-relational or unstructured, whatever you want to call it, that type of data, which again is high quality. So you talk about CCTV footage, you talk about audio calls, you talk about server logs, you talk about other emails, etc. All of that is very high quality. It's just a question of trying to understand how they can add value to the problem that any organization is trying to solve. So yes, in a nutshell, I think data quality is something that organizations need to be wary of and consider, but at the same time also need to be intelligent so that it does not become a prohibitor for them to undertake such initiatives if they want to compete in today's market.
Absolutely. Thank you, Qazafi. That was a very, very relevant comment. And I think that's the main challenge. And talking of the lack of data and lack of the external data that you mentioned, like which is not internal to the organization, Sadaf, do you think that, having led data-driven strategies for multiple FMCG companies, large-scale organizations, do you think that FMCG industry is challenged by this problem as well of not having access to the external data? And I know there's too much internal data, I understand, but when you talk about market insights, distribution analytics, do you think these are the challenges that you are facing or organizations have faced in the FMCG industry, and which is stopping the AI option?
Absolutely, Adnan. This is one of the biggest challenges, I would say, because it's not enough for us to have only data which is internal to our own ecosystem. For example, we get primary sales data, we get secondary sales data, but that doesn't give us a real insight into what's out there. What opportunities are we missing? What is it that we need to target in terms of white space mapping? Are we doing enough? What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? What are our competitors doing? So, and I, again, I would say that perhaps data is still there from external sources, but there is nothing which I would say as a cohesive, cumulative data lake or a platform which allows you to access that. You can pay for it, you can subscribe for it. It's a huge opportunity. We have a lot of companies which work on this. We have Nielsen, we have Mindshares. The Nielsens and the Mindshares of this world, they do provide a lot of external data, but how accurate is that? That is a question we often find ourselves asking. And it's not that we are paranoid, or it's not that by virtue of it being external sources, companies do not want to trust that data. When that data is actioned upon, are we getting the results that we paid for? I don't think so. So over the course of the years, we've again tried again and again and failed, and that has led that deep rooted sentiment in FMCGs that this is not that great in terms of getting external insights. We need to do something innovative. We need to think outside the box, and that's where a real opportunity arises. There are some players in the market that are actually thinking outside the box. They're trying to do something which is, proper, collection of data, granular collection of data. They're expanding the scope of the surveys. They're trying to reach maximum demographics to kind of actually derive good analytics on that particular demographic, on that region, on that geography, on that SEC. So there are so many different layers and flavors of data that is required for the business to be able to customize their marketing, category, channel insights. And essentially, that's where we're lacking. I mean, we're literally, if you ask me, we're literally flying blind. Doing a survey of 35 people or 300 people, that's not even a drop in the ocean when you compare it to the billions of consumers that are consuming, for example, PepsiCo products. What am I going to do with the data that is comprising of 1,000 individuals spread across 4 SECs? So, external data is there, the quality is very poor and is just nearly not enough. And primarily, what I also feel is that, this requires conscious thought process. It requires like Qazafi mentioned, it's a people and process problem. It's a business problem. It's not a technology problem. So this requires investment of human resources. This requires investment of financial resources. This requires time and attention, and it requires a strategy to be in place. The data strategy cannot be an afterthought, in essence.
I think that's really insightful, Sadaf. And honestly speaking, for FMCGs like the companies you work for, I mean, it's very important to understand the population concentration in different regions, geospatial analysis, socioeconomic classes, and all these things. And the use cases that I mentioned, all of these are primarily based on external data, which is not visible to you, available to you within the in-house system that you have as an FMCG. So very, very spot on. And taking the cue from what you've said, Asif, coming to you, I think when it comes about data, size of data, and the plethora of information available, telcos have been instrumental in AI adoption. Churn prediction is something I heard, and we were involved. Obviously, we are exterior data, so we were really involved with telcos. You were part of IBM, and you know how telcos were using the data for churn prediction and cross-sell, upsell. But somehow, we see that the financial sector and some other organizations in Pakistan, they did not adopt it a decade ago, I would say. So now, how do you see them adopting? Do you think they're picking up pace, or what was hindering their AI adoption? We would love to hear your comments on that.
So Adnan, in my view, I think firstly, I just want to make one point based on all the comments. I think very relevant comments. We have to break down the myth of artificial intelligence. I think it's almost become a myth in terms of why it's a talking point. Like digital is, same artificial intelligence become a talking point as well, which is an important talking point. But we have to understand this is the sprinkler on the cake. It's not the cake or even the layer of cream on top of it. It is actually artificial intelligence is a sprinkler. And if you can imagine, the cake could be the data, and then the lakes and everything we talked about on top of it, and then you put the artificial intelligence on top of it. So that's what we are really talking about, because unless we get the cake right and the layer of icing on it right, putting that sprinkler is not going to make a much of a difference. So that's a point I just want to make sure that everybody understands, and I'm sure we're all talking about the same thing. Now, how do we get the cake right? Because we got to get the data right. And you rightly pointed out, telcos got it by almost design, maybe a couple of decades ago or a decade ago, churn predictions and their outgoing subscribers and incoming, so they were able to do it. Banks have been talking about it for many years as well, and they have such rich data as compared to that, but somehow that adoption has been slower because the focus has been, in my opinion, a lot to get their core right, and then focus on data. So it's not that it's not been there; it's been a consideration, but they never really got till they got their core fully digitized. The data would come on top of it, and I think that data strategies are now being reviewed again and being looked at and see how do we make the most out of it. Because traditionally people wanted these big data warehouses to get the right information. But now with the new technologies available, it can be done much faster. But again, I come to the same point. Has business owned this problem? Have we put the right organizations in place? Have we put the right processes in place? And the answer to a lot of these questions for organizations who haven't got it right is not that they didn't get the technology right. The tech has been there to support. It's those processes that were supposed to be there. As Sadaf just said, how do we get that data and make it really trustable data? Was there a proper process in place to do that? For their organizations put in place? Now, banks are one area. Then you look at retail, another industry. huge amount of data. Recently, Pakistan in the last few years has got into this retail culture, commerce culture. The amount of data being being absorbed by the retail organizations is huge, like FMCGs, and most of the data is not being used. It's just being, I don't know, stored or not stored, structured or unstructured. We can have all of these discussions, but the point is, it's not being used to get the insight about the shoppers, to get the insight about the retailers. You can use it for credit histories. You can do it for a lot of things. But can we do that? Again, how do we do this? If we get those processes right in place, then you got healthcare as well. Another industry that is capturing data like anything. Huge data sets being captured. Now with telehealth, even more, the amount of increase in telehealth because of COVID has been huge, and huge amount of data is being stored. So yes, telcos got it initially, and they've made a lot of progresses. Rest of the industry, the financial sector is getting it in Pakistan, and I see a lot of progress being made there, but the rest of the industries are still lagging behind. And I think we have to break this myth of artificial intelligence and come down to what we've been really talking about. How do we get the cake right? How do we get the data right so that we can then take it from there?
Thank you very much, Asif. One of the comments that you made, you were absolutely spot on. One of the comments that you made about financial sector focusing a lot on setting their core right first. This reminds me of the time when we used to meet a lot of customers in financial sector and talk about data lake and data analytics and AI. And every time what we heard was that let us first fix the core, and then we can, once the data is in good shape, then we can see what we can do in the AI space. So absolutely, I think that is one thing. But honestly speaking, the way the thought process should be is that, even if the base of the data or the core of the data is 70% in the correct form, this should not stop me from embarking upon some AI initiatives just to see how things are shaping up so that you get that first mover advantage. But yeah, I agree. This is the thought process that was existing in the industry. And you are absolutely right when you say that retail has a lot of data, a huge amount of data, and there are a lot of use cases that you can work on. So coming over to you, Qazafi, Asif brilliantly encapsulated the landscape in retail industry, telcos, and financial sector. But one sector that I honestly believe that has a lot of potential to grow when it comes to and flourish when it comes to the use of AI, especially for the citizens, is the government sector. So what are your views on that? And if you believe that this is the right way to go, then what is stopping the governments in Pakistan from using AI for the better services of the citizens?
Yeah, thank you, Adnan. And I think government, obviously, we all understand that government is a different beast, and it's not only in Pakistan, it's across the board, right? Across the globe, you talk about government, and any consulting organization would cringe. But at the same time, if I talk about AI, I think there are a lot of opportunities within government, not only for their internal functioning, but also I think they have a big role to play in terms of the general adoption of AI across the market. And the opportunities are limitless. So you talk about areas like healthcare, which Asif was referring to as well. You talk about safe cities, smart cities. Everything is going to be driven based on data. You talk about cybersecurity, national security, disaster management. Every area is data rich, and every area can get a lot of value out of the adoption of AI. Easier said than done. I think the barriers or the challenges are going to be typical to any other organization, more so because being government, it gets compounded. But starting off with the vision and the intent that AI can make a difference. I think there are some certain initiatives being done in Pakistan. Recently, the president of Pakistan launched an AI sort of a initiative, which is primarily around initial level skills imparting in terms of the data science and AI area. But cultural shift, your skill set, capacity, capability, all of these challenges. Then there are some unique challenges as well, which are maybe unique to AI adoption. For example, procurement itself. When you talk about government procurement, a lot of projects, the government wants the IP to be owned by the government department or the agencies which is undertaking that project. In AI, that might not be that easy or straightforward because the vendors might want to retain that AI, IP. And at times, it's a black box for the vendors as well if you're using unsupervised learning. So I think the vision needs to be set by the government. There are a lot of opportunities in terms of their internal functioning. But then if you talk about the general adoption of AI or data analytics in the larger marketplace, they have a role to play there, because I think there will be legislation which is required at certain areas when you talk about general AI rollout. And I'll give you an example. If you talked about in your intro, you talked about self-driving cars. If there is an accident of a self-driving car, who is responsible? Is it the car owner? Is it the car manufacturer? Or is it the organization which provided that AI software? So all of this needs to be sorted out through legislation. And at the same time, a lot of data protection in terms of personally identifiable information when you talk about AI or general data analytics. That is a problem which Europe and US have already sorted out to a large extent. It needs to be figured out in our part of the world as well. So the opportunities are limitless. The challenges are there. I think they're known challenges, and somebody needs to take the initiative and start resolving them one step at a time.
Absolutely, Qazafi, very insightful, I must say. And I think you're very right that when it comes to government adopting the AI-based use cases and implementing for citizens, the legal aspect is very important. Like you said, if an accident happens to a self-driving car, who's responsible? Similarly, if you see AI being adopted for diagnostic purposes in health institutions of the government, if there's a wrong diagnosis and if the patient, if anything, God forbid, anything bad happens to the patient, there are a lot of medical legal scenarios that you need to think of before you actually deploy such solutions in government sector. So absolutely spot on, and thank you very much for that. Sadaf, coming to you, what globally people see as one of the problems hindering the adoption of AI is that people or the organizations do not know where to start with, what are the most valuable starting points to induct AI. And if you start wrong or in the wrong area, there's a great likelihood that you'll end up having a very diminished value being driven from the AI initiatives. So what do you think? I mean, do you think that a starting point should be well thought out? You need to take your time to decide, but then it's a trade-off. If you take too much time, like you wait for years for other organizations to do something and then you embark upon such initiatives, you're losing out on the first mover advantage, you're losing out on the opportunity as well. So do you think that you need to strike the right balance between finding the right starting point and then waiting where the market is going and how other people are benefiting from that? Do you think you need to strike a balance on that?
So great question, Adnan, and a little bit of both. So based on my experience, I mean, when I worked for Affinity, and when Affinity started, it was a startup. And one of the things that we learned to do, and we learned it the hard way, was sometimes you need to learn to run before you can walk. And while on the other hand, you need to be able to create business-specific use cases for a particular industry to be able to have a very sound basis for pitching your case for AI. Another thing is that there is a lot of technology jargon that is thrown about by many consultants that is pretty confusing to an average business user. One of the biggest myths is that people assume that AI and machine learning are the same thing. They're not. AI is a very, very broad umbrella term. It encompasses NLP, machine learning, and a number of other techniques and disciplines. However, when you bandy about these big jargons and big words, and then you don't really have a really laser focused approach in terms of identifying business specific use cases, that also kills a lot of initiatives, because the idea is not to confuse the audience. The idea is to partner with the business and organically identify use cases, make it a business ownership as well. That is what is primarily lacking. So it cannot be something that you cascade from the top and say that, okay, this is the big new shiny toy that's out there, we have the money, let's go and get it and let's implement it. The other big reason is that, I was reading a study by Gartner recently, and it said that 69 to 70% of the work that a manager does is going to be replaced through automation and AI augmentation in the next 4 years. So that's the kind of digital disruption that we're looking at. Now, if we look at that, the pace of disruption, and last year, a COVID-19 pandemic has proven that first mover advantage is key to a lot of businesses surviving and thriving and coming out on top. So agility is also important. However, you can't really just rush into things. So just a balance of both is necessary. You can't really wait for, okay, we'll wait for the rest of the world to do it, and then we will feel safe enough to actually invest in it. That's not a great approach. It will seriously disadvantage that organization, and it might even cost it customer base. It might cost it in terms of its interactions and engagement with its consumers. So it could have very long lasting impacts on business. Similarly, what I feel is that one other area which really concerns me when it comes to AI is there is an internal resistance to change from within the organizations, and primarily the fear stems from, oh, AI comes in, it's going to replace human jobs. So AI is not necessarily meant to replace mundane works, and therefore certain kinds of jobs would become redundant eventually. However, AI is also used like in health imaging and in a lot of other complex systems. So work augmentation is definitely the area that most companies need to focus on, just to open up the door for AI initiatives to be better received. And once the reception is there, then obviously you can move into a lot of other directions. So once that fear goes away that, oh, I'm going to lose my job, so let's not implement AI, that really kills innovation in its infancy.
Very, very insightful and informative, Sadaf. Thank you very much. I totally agree with that. And Asif, a question for you. Actually, what we have seen in Pakistani market is that people want something. I mean, like the corporate sector, especially, they want tangible outcomes. They want something like they buy visualizations, they buy hardware devices, boxes. They feel very comfortable that the money that they're spending on, they're getting something out of it. They can see it. It's tangible, right? Unfortunately or fortunately, AI is a different ball game, right? You need patience for that, right? You implement machine learning models. There's a complete methodology. It takes you maybe 4 to 5 months, depending upon the use case, on an average. And then you deploy it. You get, what are you getting out of it? Is predictions, classifications, right? Things that you need to test them on. You operationalize it. Another 3 to 4 months, you start getting results. You're getting new customers. You're not getting new customers. Anything improved, not improved. Now this 11 months, you need to be patient and you're not getting anything out of it. Do you think that this lack of patience and lack of access to tangible outcome is one of the biggest reasons that is stopping people to adopting it?
So I don't know, Adnan, if it's one of the biggest reasons. It is one of the reasons. There are many other bigger reasons than that as well. As I keep saying, that everybody is looking at AI as a technology problem. So can I buy better hardware? Can I buy more sensors? Can I put more and more into that so I can solve the technology problem? But the organizations who've done that as well are not getting the right results out of it. And one of the reasons you've pointed out very clearly is the patience, because see, there is data involved in it, and data requires training, data requires history based on history results, and a lot of decisions are being made by the organization. So yes, patience is one part of it, but it's also, what do you really choose as a business problem to implement the AI on? And that's a very critical point, because unless you get success in the areas that you start implementing AI, which have the biggest impact on the organization, that patience is also not of use. So you and I know, all of us know, that data-driven problems have been out there, and solutions have been out there for several years. They're not new, correct? Now, if you're just trying to solve the same problem but scaling it bigger, not necessarily means that you've started an AI journey. The AI journey is where you're really deducing results much faster, much quicker, based on larger a set of data, both structured, unstructured, all of that, and the processes you're trying to improve. So we talked about automation at one point, and automation has become much more interesting because we are joining it with artificial intelligence. And now the robotic process automation suddenly becomes more interesting because there is AI involved with it. And now a teller can do the job faster, or a customer service consultant can have a better view of things, or a retail teller has better things to do, or you can do better online commerce. So yes, patience is one part, but then selecting the area of the organization that you really want to bring artificial intelligence on is another huge part, because you don't want to climb something which is very difficult and already you have lack of data, and you do that. And finally, we have to get this out of our head. Unless we get the right mind frame within the organizations, who are willing to have patience, willing to invest properly in the people and the right data and information, we're not going to get the results, because the real results will come then when the training of data has happened to produce that intelligence that we require. It's like human being. The more we learn, the more cognitive we get, the more better our analysis are. Similarly, the more we can get the information to do in the right context with the more history, the better results of that. So yes, patience, but then patience around doing the right things and then waiting for them to deliver the results.
Thank you very much, Asif. Very spot on, very insightful, I must say. And one point that Sadaf, that you mentioned was about AI replacing humans, right? And this is what we come across all the time. Whenever we are doing presentations on AI, talking to people, socializing use cases, this is one point that we often get to listen. So Qazafi, coming to you, I mean, I've heard you talking a lot about AI to be considered as not artificial intelligence, but instead of that as augmented intelligence. So would you be able to comment on the fear that we see in the market about AI replacing humans, and what's your thought on that?
Absolutely, Adnan, I agree, and I think Sadaf made the right comments in terms of how AI is going to evolve. I think it's going to be both. So in the medium to long term, there will be areas where AI ends up replacing a lot of human jobs. You gave the example of self-driving cars. So as that discipline matures, the human taxi drivers, they are at risk in terms of losing their jobs. Asif just talked about RPA, and in terms of how RPA can help bring in efficiency, better data quality within the organization. But that means a lot of repetitive tasks can be automated, and then you need to find ways of promoting these employees that you have within the organization and getting them to do more value-added stuff. So I think the successful organizations would be with the ones who are not actually looking at replacing these employees, but they're actually looking at enhancing their expertise or using them for more value-added stuff. That is, how I think the right way of looking at it. And smart organizations would look at it from that perspective. In other areas, I think it would definitely be a case of augmented intelligence. We talked about some cases in government. You talked about healthcare. I think that is one classic example where the doctors would have a sort of a second opinion in terms of the AI model, in terms of disease prediction. And I think that is a fantastic sort of capability to have when you're considering the rate of our population population growth across the globe. Imagine what benefits you would end up having in such an augmented sort of world where there are a scarcity of doctors across the globe, and you have that model which is helping or assisting the doctors available in terms of providing that second opinion. So I think it's going to be both, but at the same time, AI is going to create a lot of other jobs as well. So there will be new skill set which is acquired with the adoption of AI, and that creates opportunity in the market. So maybe some areas would be impacted, but then others would be created as well to balance it out.
So to summarize, I think that organizations should stop worrying about, and people working in those organizations should stop worrying about being replaced by AI. So your point is that they will be augmented, their capability will be supported, further facilitated, and they will be able to use their skill set in much more useful ways within those organizations.
That's true. At the same time, it is a genuine problem as well from an individual perspective.
But it's not as big as it is being presented. Absolutely.
Right.
That's very insightful. Sadaf, when we talk about FMCG industry in general and AI in general, so what specific use cases do you believe will come into action in the next year or so in Pakistan? It would be great to have your thoughts on that.
So, basically, given the current scenario and the fact that e-commerce and social commerce is on the rise, the retail industry per se, and when we talk about FMCGs, we are directly related to how well the retail industry is performing. So, retail industry is all set for an AI-enabled transformation or augmentation. And one of the best examples is in-store user experiences, in-store execution. Then you have visual searches. Then you have customer interaction improvements through the use of AI-enabled chatbots. So these are some of the retail experiences. Then of course there is the entire e-commerce value chain, starting from the point where you have somebody place an order, suggested ordering, prediction of, next best order basis, past trends, using multiple silos of data. Then obviously, then the distribution and logistics piece comes in. So, the entire value chain that the FMCG industry is concerned with has a lot of intrinsic organic use cases that could really benefit from it. So the use of AI in conjunction with IoT, it is being successfully explored even across multiple countries across the globe in PepsiCo universe. So it's a little bit slow in terms of adoption here. Despite the fact that when we said that one of the biggest fears is that humans would lose their jobs, I personally feel that we are a low-cost market any way you look at it. Humans in Pakistan would probably be the last ones to lose their jobs because we're that low cost in terms of human resource augmentation. So, that fear apart, the other bigger, obstacles that I see in terms of these use cases getting to see the light of day and actually getting implemented is the cost of implementation as well. So to date, every single person in the sector, in the industry that I've talked to, I would say a good 70 to 80% still feel that investing in AI-based technology is a luxury. It's not a necessity. So, the perception is that it's expensive, it's going to cost us. And, those who do end up investing, they feel that it should provide quick fix solutions. So that's not what the purpose of AI is. It is not going to provide you with a panacea for all of your current problems with regards to your distribution, your sales, your in-store execution. It's more of a long-term game. It's more of a long-term strategy, and it requires retraining your existing human resources, your workforce, so that they are able to do more value added jobs, like Asif mentioned. But what are those jobs? I mean, essentially, somebody has to go in and program, they have to go in and provide those scripts that those bots are going to be using. So essentially, the retraining of the workforce is something that is going to be a heavy investment. People still assume that, it's expensive, so we should probably not do it while we're facing an economic crunch during COVID and post-COVID. But just think outside of the comfort zone for a moment. So, as you know, you must have heard that electric light was not invented by the reinvention of candles. So there used to be candle makers at one point in time. The world has changed. You don't really need candles anymore. You need people who have a very different skill set and they provide opportunities. Any organization that provides opportunities to its individuals to learn, relearn, reskill themselves, they're going to be the first adopters in terms of moving forward on the AI journey.
Thank you very much, Sadaf. I think you have very well articulated it, and in-store use cases of AI, visual searches, chatbots. I think all of these you correctly mentioned are going to be extremely useful, and they will actually transform the way FMCGs are working currently and the pace at which they are working. So thank you very much for that. Asif, a question for you. I mean, as the cliche goes, that there's no need to predict if you don't want to act on it. And that's what the actionable insights is all about. What we have seen in the last decade or so is that some organizations have spent huge amounts of money and time and energy in predicting things, but they've not developed that trust that they start taking decisions on those predictions. So the predictions and the classifications are lying somewhere in the tables, in the data lakes, in the hosted systems, but they never tried those predictions to see if there is any outcome or not. So do you think that this lack of action is causing this delayed adoption as well or not?
So I think you bring out a very interesting point, and I've had experiences personally working with large enterprises. There was a enterprise that we worked with. I will not say which industry. We were able to build a technology solution for them that was creating up to 5 million events a day for them to be act on. Okay, 5 million events for their consumers. You know how many actions were being taken on those 5 million? Between 500 to 1,000 a day. So less than 1%, actually 0.00 something. And that's so typical even today, because I'll keep repeating it. People think they've put the best technology, Rolls-Royce, in their environment, which is creating all of these signals and IoT outputs and this and that and the marketing insights. But actually, how much of those are getting converted into real business or real impact? And this organization is a progressive organization, which I'm talking about, a large organization, and they were less than 1%. Maybe that number has increased in the last couple of years, but still, it is all about defining what we can action and how we can action. You and I know next best action has been there for many years now. That didn't require artificial intelligence to come in place. We could, when an operator would get a customer service call, they would know, okay, Sadaf Saad is calling him, and Sadaf is a platinum customer, Sadaf, and then also suggest to them, what do you sell next to Sadaf? That's been there for many years now. That's not today's discussion. But how much of that has been used by organizations? And that's been the challenge, that we're not harnessing all the things that we've got already, and we're trying to just move ahead on these things. I think if we can make all the signals within the organizations, or all the data points within the organization actionable, even 30% of them, I think the impact of this whole revolution of artificial intelligence, which is a revolution that's going to come, is going to be huge. We talked about doctors predicting. IBM about 7-8 years ago invented Watson, and everybody knows about Watson. And one of the use cases about Watson was oncology. And it took many years for that to get adopted, because you needed a lot of data around it. We as systems currently are doing a lot of work for various customers around the world, and still solving the data science problem, and then getting to how do we make it actionable to artificial intelligence. And I think this is such a relevant question, that it's not about what you're producing within the organization. It's actually about what you're really doing with that, and what actions you can define. And I think Sadaf said that, and Qazafi said that, and I'm saying that that this then starts to become the business problem. What's the right use case and what right output that business is? You can go bottom up, you can come top down. We got to solve it through business to the actionable item. Imagine the 5 million signals coming out of that organization. If we could just exponentially grow that to 10%, 15%, their customer base would increase rapidly.
Excellent, very informative, Asif. And Sadaf, you mentioned, and Qazafi, question for you, but Sadaf mentioned that a lot of vendors, a lot of consulting services companies are setting the wrong expectations with the customers and prospects. And that is one reason why I believe that the trust in the AI and the trust in the data analytics solutions bringing value to these organizations is something that is missing. And if it diminishes, trust me, it is going to be a very painful thing, because it will further hinder the adoption of AI. So what do you think? I mean, what approaches or what best practices do you think the consulting firms who are working in the AI should be practicing and should be exhibiting and setting, and how important is it for them to set the right expectations and be very candid, what's doable, what's not doable?
Right. So yeah, I agree. I think there is a lot of responsibility on vendors or consulting organizations which are working with any customer in any industry, because they have that responsibility in terms of making the customer successful. So I think the first thing, I think we discussed this at the start of it. Asif was spot on in terms of his analysis. I think it cannot be an IT project. Most of the times, technology takes up the initiative within the organization because it looks nice on their resume. But in fact, because the business is not involved from day one, it ends up getting scrapped, or it does not get used in terms of how it should be used within that organization. So I think, really understanding which area to target first, quantifying the business value or the ROI versus the complexity involved, doing a cost benefit sort of an analysis, trying to come up with the right problem to solve. That is fundamental for any new organization embarking on an AI journey. Because if you get that first step wrong, it's going to create a lot of negativities from a future perspective as well. And for me, AI is more, you can look at it or consider it from a perspective where there is a hypothesis or an assumption from a business perspective, and then you're either trying to prove it or disprove it. So that agility in terms of getting from the hypothesis to the actual proof of it, or discarding that hypothesis, it's important that you're able to follow as an organization an agile approach. So that again is something which consulting organizations need to figure out and consult customers on. And once that is sorted out in terms of going from hypothesis to actually proving or disproving, that becomes very quick. And you're able to really focus on the problems or the values or the use cases which can add value to the organization. The second element which I think is very important and gets overlooked at times is the actual rollout or deployment of it from a technical or technology perspective landscape as well. Because you're not going to run that model once. You need to deploy it in a production environment where it is going to be interacting with a lot of downstream systems. And at the same time, over time, you need to improve that model as well. So I think a lot of consulting organizations miss that part out. They're only focusing on the initial model development and then checking the accuracy through different techniques. And for the more mature organizations that are, a certain level within their AI journey, I think DevOps or MLOps, in this case, whatever you want to call it, that capability becomes very, very important. So again, consulting organizations need to educate and train customers how to go about setting that maturity up within the organization.
Thank you, Qazafi. And I think we have already towards the end of the show. So just a couple of more questions, and we'll just wind up. I can see many people who have joined us live sending questions and sending comments. So thank you very much for all the comments. Most of the questions that I see have been already answered, specifically related to the government sector, adoption of AI in government, and then how important the data is, and all those questions have been answered. But I'll see if there's anything that is left unanswered. I'll try to ask the panel. So thank you very much again for being for participating in the session. So the last question to you. I mean, there have been a lot of promises being made with organizations globally when it comes to acceptance and induction of AI. Huge expectation set, and Qazafi did mention, touched upon them as well. I mean, what do you think that what is the right way to actually start a pilot project so that you can actually understand what's real, what's not real, what is just too much hypothetical, and what's very close to reality? Do you think that having an MVP done, minimum viable product being created, is one approach, or as Qazafi mentioned, that agility is one approach, doing something in an agile way, or like TEDA always advocates that rapid analytics consulting frameworks should be developed whereby you test an AI use case in 3 weeks, get done with it. If it's working, go ahead. If it's not working, just leave it. So, what do you think is the best approach to developing this trust in the AI when it comes to the use cases?
Okay, so I can speak on behalf of my organization's data and analytics journey. And, speaking of the FMCG sector, consumer is the king. And primarily, the maximum investment from a business perspective that companies like PepsiCo, Unilever's, Reckitt's, and Nestle's of this world, investment is being made on consumer journey mapping through digital. A lot of consumer insights, a lot of consumer engagement. This is something which is relatively new. So go back 5 years, perhaps the focus was more on the execution piece, the distribution and logistics part, automation of sales, creation of CRMs, deployment of CRMs. However, the focus has changed from the transactional and execution pieces of process optimization. It's moved towards the human element of the business. So if you take out the consumer, there is no FMCG, right? So, essentially, we need to understand our consumers better. We need to engage with our consumers better. The consumer base is expanding. So billions of products of a company like PepsiCo get sold every day. At least a couple of billion people are using these products on a daily basis. Do we know how they feel about the brand? Do we know how they feel about the product? Are we getting sufficient insights from that? That can actually give a huge boost to the business in a lot of areas, from product development to marketing to channel investments to working with our franchise partners, with our distributors. So these insights which are focused and driven from the consumer, these are very critical. And I feel that, in the use case journey, the digital, and technology-based interventions that can come into play that would enable us to capture these opportunities and to transform them into actual sales. Those are the ones which would really garner the maximum interest. Business would be willing to invest and actually chase after these opportunities. Essentially, why? Because obviously, if I know a certain flavor of a certain brand is not doing so well, and I keep investing on that through marketing, to other, in-store and out, on-air executions, I'm just wasting my money. And essentially, that's money that could have been better spent elsewhere. So targeting that primarily, and when we talk about decision support systems, so Asif mentioned a point, and I just want to touch upon that as well from a use case perspective. So yes, decision support systems, data-driven, have been in play for a couple of decades now, but AI takes us beyond that. So, first in, first out, caller-based systems, when you call a bank, when you call any other company, you're in an IVR, first agent gets the first caller. That's old school. What are you supposed to propose to them? What are the packages that you're supposed to tell them? What is your standard set of responses, suggested responses? All of that has been there. What takes it to the next level is understanding that consumer so well that you're able to, in real time, generate a response that is going to seal the deal for you. So that's what essentially we did at Affinity. So best caller to the best agent, not the first caller to the first available agent. It was transformational because it might be that I connect best with Qazafi and I get connected to Adnan. So, you may not be able to convince me to satisfy my queries or to be able to create that rapport or that bond that would, enable me to be a brand ambassador going forward for this particular brand, to be a repeat customer. However, had I been connected to Qazafi on that call, it could have been a very different story altogether. This is a very small example, but, when you look at it at a much larger scale, huge implications there. So the better the use case generation from a consumer perspective, from a consumer journey mapping, from a consumer product engagement perspective, I think the better the opportunity for any business. And it could be an FMCG product, it could be a technology product. It doesn't matter. I mean, the consumer psyche works the same way. And if we can somehow connect the product with the consumer and do it in a very intelligent way, and that's where the intelligence and the artificial intelligence comes into play, then that could be a potential game changer.
Thank you very much, Sadaf. Very well said. And I've gone through the questions list. There are a lot of questions, but there are two questions that I'd like to take and present to the panelists. So one, Qazafi to you, and one, Asif to you. One of the viewers is asking that he's working in the government department, audit department, and Qazafi, your points on that. Any data analytics or any AI use cases for making the audit department more efficient, like bringing transparency or something, Qazafi, your points, and then I can ask Asif for the other question.
Well, I think, audit, definitely there are a lot of opportunities. I think you could draw a parallel from taxation, because a lot of, taxation audits happen. So selecting the sample in the first place, because the actual human resource or expertise in terms of doing the manual audit is limited. So first of all, having the capability to understand which sample set to select based on certain AI-driven or data-driven techniques, that is the first benefit, which I can think of. And then the second benefit is using AI to actually do it automatically without human intervention as well. So I think there are opportunities. I'd love to have a more detailed discussion. They can reach out to us or to you, whoever, in more detail, and we'll be happy to share what else can be done.
Thank you very much, Qazafi. You're absolutely right. The audit selection, making it more efficient, all of this depends hugely on the data analytics and AI. Asif, one of the viewers has asked a question that in pharmaceutical industry, do you think that AI could be adopted, and any one or two use cases that you have in mind for pharma industry?
So just one point to add on Qazafi's explanation on audit department has SAP implemented. So if they reach out to us, we can really help them, because a lot of data is there in SAP and a lot of things can be done. So just that point that I'm aware of. So in pharma industry, I look at it from two sides. One is the business to business part of pharma industry, which is the supply chain part. And I think that is overlooked a lot of places, how the pharmaceuticals are able to supply the medicines to the various retail outlets or retail chain. And I think there's a huge amount of data and artificial intelligence use case that can be done. How do you get the right amounts to the right places, to the right hospitals, to the right population areas? And that's a B2B problem. Currently it is done based on demand only, not based on intelligence. So I think that use case, can you imagine if we can really implement it and we can get some data around the population size, the various attributes of the population, and then have the supply chain work from a business to business perspective? That's a huge area, so that can be joined in. So that's one large use case, which is not really looked upon a lot of times, whereas places like Philippines, Indonesia, and many other countries have really worked on the B2B automation and intelligence. And the second, which is normal, which is more of a B2C, which is like a retail kind of pharmaceutical, is that how do you make the e-commerce better in the pharmaceutical industry as well, correct? I'm separating a little bit from healthcare, because healthcare is a much wider topic, but it's actually making that B2C e-commerce, as Sadaf talked about, how can you make that experience better? And I think that's another thing I've not gone and touched manufacturing yet. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
stuff there. I'm more talking about B2B and B2C that can be done.
You're spot on, Asif. Thank you very much. Very insightful. And I'm sure the viewers' question is very much addressed, and I'm sure that they are able to understand your response. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for viewing us live, joining us on Facebook and other social media channels and YouTube as well. It was such a pleasure hosting such a distinguished panel. I'm really grateful to Asif, Sadaf, and Qazafi for taking out the time and answering the questions and enlightening us all, and especially the viewers of today's show, about the challenges that we are facing when it comes to the acceptance and induction of AI, specifically talking about Pakistan sector. This is very useful. Thank you very much once again. And this live session has been recorded, and the viewers will be able to re-watch the session, recorded session, on all of the CxO Forum, Analytics, and Systems channels. And the links will be available shortly right after the session ends. And before I leave, once again, thanks. I want to present thanks to all of you, especially Qazafi, Sadaf, and Asif. It was such a pleasure, hosting you today. And we look forward to many more exciting sessions. It was truly informative, and we are truly honored to have you all on board with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Adnan.
Thank you so much, Adnan.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.
Take care, everyone. Allah Hafiz.